you are a practicing Christian. We're, this is important to know, folks, that as it seems that maybe our numbers are thinning out a little bit.
Oh.
Practicing Christians are still a viable force in any community when they're unleashed. And Bob Dixon's a practicing Christian. Bob, I remember, I think, that at one time, maybe when you first ran for public office, you may have been associated with Rock Assembly of God, were you?
Solid Rock over on North Sherman.
Yes. And
Yes.
you were influential enough that I happen to know a guy, had been a friend of mine for years, who has been a lifelong Democrat, and he worked for your campaign the first time you ran for state representative, and Bob is a Republican. Now, are you now with Central Assembly, or where do you go?
Well, actually, we're at Day Spring Fellowship,
Well,
which
Day
is
Spring, yes.
the old High Street building,
Mhm.
and we've been there, goodness, I think almost 8 years now, and some just wonderful people.
I know Day Spring.
Yeah.
I've been there a number of years ago.
Uh-huh.
In fact, Nancy and I went one time when they had a televangelist in there, Rodney Howard Brown. He was
Okay.
there for
Okay.
one service or two.
Okay.
But that goes back a number of years. But now, of course, Day Spring is an independent Pentecostal / charismatic type congregation, well established, been here a long time. It started in old Cox Hospital North in the Fountain meeting room. Isn't it amazing how much is in this old brain? I remember this stuff.
Well, it's good stuff, and it's kind of you to say what you said. I love people, and I will say that I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for the love of God that was shown to me, and I just want to demonstrate that to people, no matter who they are, where they've been.
Right.
That's really what motivates me to serve all people, to respect all people. And I really, over the years, I would say, increasingly see no lines in the church and in society. If we could get a picture of that and a sort of a vision of that, as we were
Right.
talking about with water, I think we'd have some fresh rivers flow for our society as well.
Acts Ministry, that is our corporate covering here, and the cover for Acts Media Group, which is the department of Acts Ministry. Acts Ministry is in its it's finished 26 years of history, based right here in Springfield, one of the best kept secrets in Springfield. And Acts Ministry historically has been trans-denominational and trans-doctrinal. The mission statement has been unity in Christ through the Holy Spirit. That has not changed. I gave it a motto a number of years ago, serving where needed, which they do. And the man who's been president of Acts Ministry now for the past 5 years, Dr. Jim Whining, he added a second motto, doing the right thing. And Acts Ministry, folks, is very, very busy with lots of causes. I hope you go to the website, www, of course, with the dot, and then ACTSmediagroup.com. You'll have an opportunity there to hit a donate button if you want to help the Helping Hands Fund, help folks afford to buy supplements that Matt's going to tell us about in a little bit. If he doesn't, I will, from the naturalsolutionstore.bz. If you'll get ready, Matt, we'll break to you for a commercial when you're ready. In the meantime, I'm going to continue saying a good word about Acts Ministry, because not only can you donate there online to help people with natural supplements, but you can also just donate to Acts Ministry. And Acts Ministry is doing a tremendous work with the handicapped, with veterans, with kidney patients, with parents of autistic children, and the list goes on and on. If there's a worthy cause someplace, Acts Ministry is there. And one of the things that helps us to be on the air is the Natural Solution Store.bz. Are you ready, Matt? There comes that famous microphone.
Yes, I'm
the
ready.
famous voice. lemon flavor thing, because when I go trout fishing and then I clean the trout, partially clean them in the stream over at Bennett Spring, your hands smell like fish until you take some lemon juice and you can rub it on your hands and you get rid of all the fish smell off your hands. And anybody that doesn't like the taste of strong fish, if you will flay them and add a little lemon juice, concentrated lemon juice to the water that you're soaking them in the refrigerator, that takes away a lot of the strong taste. Well, that's my fish story for today. We're back to Bob Dixon. And Nancy, you're being very patient sitting there, and I'm going to be calling on you in a little bit. But first of all, Bob, did allude to the fact that you began your political work as a state representative.
Yes.
Many people will know, but many people would not know that for a time your mother served as a state representative, but in a different district
Yes.
than the one you were elected in.
Yes.
When you see your mom, you tell her hello for me.
I'll sure do it.
Please do that.
I will sure do it.
And but you served as all the terms allowed by law as a state representative. What's that? 4 terms?
I was elected in 2002, and I served for 8 years, 4 terms in the Missouri House. And then in 2010, ran for the state Senate and was elected there 2 times. The second time, no opponent. That happened twice in the House. I really tried to keep in the front of my mind that although I was elected by a certain number of people, I was there to serve everyone.
Right.
And so I was term limited in December of this past year.
All right. Now, we have people watching around the world and even in the state of Missouri who may not realize that at one time there were no term limits in Missouri.
Correct.
In fact, I knew a man, African American, out of St. Louis, who he served in the House for 30-some years. Quincy Troop. Quincy Troop. And it's been 7 or 8 years ago now. Quincy called me one time, and we visited. It was after he left the House, but he was called the Dean of the House. He'd been there for so long, you know. It was an experience to visit his office. But when term limits came in, were you in the House or not?
The term limits were voted in by the public in 1996. They went into effect in 2002, and the year I was elected was the year they went into effect. And so out of 163 members in the House, there were 90 freshmen. It was difficult. It was the same year that the House went from Democrat to Republican, and the last time there had been a Republican speaker was back in the 1950s, and that speaker was no longer living. So the new speaker had to get some advice from the folks in Washington as to how to even run a chamber. It turned out okay, but one of the challenges with term limits, and I will be the first to say I voted for them at the ballot box, but over time I have found some significant problems with them. We kind of got to where we couldn't keep up with who the dean of the legislature was because things were rolling over so fast.
Right.
You know.
I remember when a Democrat friend of mine, Bob Gall, was Speaker of the House.
Yes.
Bob rode the same country school bus that my kids rode up in north central Missouri.
Okay.
And Bob had to be, he was absent for some reason, and somebody else had to fill in, presiding over the House. And I remember his famous speech when he returned. He stood there in front of the microphone in front of the House, and he said, "Did you miss me?" Because there was all kinds of confusion while he was gone. People don't recognize how important these leadership positions are. Back in the day when, obviously, legislative work was really, now it's supposed to be part-time now, half-time, but you know and I know, with committee meetings and trips back and forth to Jeff City, there's no such thing. It's really basically a full-time job.
It is.
But back a long time ago, term limits would have worked better because things were not as complicated as they are now legislatively. They're very complicated.
It's complicated, and one of the things that really began to change my mind about term limits was, information is really power. And if we want to make sure that the people are the ones with the power, we need to make sure that the people that they send to the legislature have the information that they need to make decisions. And what I saw was, with the rapid turnover, and it took me a while to recognize it, and then I really was hesitant to be opposed to term limits, because I thought, well, that's going to look somehow self-serving, and it wasn't that I wanted to stay any longer, or I was concerned about that
Perception.
but I also was concerned that we find a way to explain to people. So here's what I finally settled on. There's really the whole effort was to make sure that the people were in charge of their government. And there were some problems which brought term limits on, there's no question. But what has happened as a result, and this often occurs with whatever solution is brought forward, there's always some sort of a pitfall, because we're working with human beings, we're imperfect people. But basically, the power of the information and who was really therefore sort of making decisions or feeding the information to individuals was transferred from the people's duly elected representatives to about 5 different groups: the political parties, the lobbyists, the mega donors, the staff, and in some cases other groups such as political consultants and so forth. Those are all great people, and I have friends in all those categories. The trouble is, none of them are elected or term limited.
Right, that's
so,
right.
So we have really a different group of folks who have information where someone and the other part that is in that as well is the folks in the state agencies and the bureaucracies, where when a legislator would call them and want accountability, there were answers given. Now they sort of wait until the next one comes along,
Right.
and they'll get the information, but there's just not the same accountability. So I kind of think of it as I like to draw on Old Testament analogies. I sort of think of it as we've sold our birthright to control our own government. We have, thinking we did a good thing,
Right.
we have transferred that power to control our own government to unelected folks who are not term limited. And so my mind has been changed on term limits, and I go back now to the way the founders set it up, which was term limits every 2 years, and the power of the purse was in the House, which it still is, thank goodness. But those were the term limits, and in order for that to work, you must have not only an educated but also an engaged populace.
By the way,
Citizenry.
a while ago, I misspoke. Said Bob Gall. It's Steve Gall.
Steve, yes.
I had Bob on my brain, obviously. Steve Gall. Anyway, my experience with the legislature goes back to the middle 70s when I was there during the first administration of Kit Bond, who was the first Republican governor in a long time, and both houses were still controlled by the Democrat Party. I was there as the executive director. Now, listen to this, guys, so you know I did something really big. It's a big title. Executive Director of the Special Committee on Labor Relations. How about that?
Well, you got the Greene County Commissioner to come on your show. That's pretty big about that.
There you go. Thank you, Matt. Matthew always reminds me of Matt Dillon. I think all he needs is a 10-gallon hat and a hog leg. And,
I got one.
okay. And then you have to shave if you're going to be Matt Dillon.
Can Matt Dillon have a goatee?
No.
He does now.
Festus did. Maybe you could be Festus. Uh-oh, here comes the microphone.
Yeah, Festus will work. I don't want to shave my goatee. I know you don't like facial hair, Dr. Paul.
I'm just not a fan.
I would probably pass out if you came in with facial hair on your face.
I did it twice.
That sounds like a challenge to me.
I did it twice in my life. Yeah, that's a challenge. Yeah, I'd gain one friend and lose a whole bunch more. Anyway, back to my days in Jeff City with that committee. We were to research the issue of public employee collective bargaining and then write a report on it, including a model bill. Mm-hmm. So I put together a committee from across the state. I had the legal counsel for the firefighters in St. Louis, Bill Barkley. I had the legal counsel for Kansas City, Harry Brown. So we had labor and management. I had Don Bush, city manager of Springfield at the time. Mm-hmm. I had a woman who was the head of the industrial relations department at St. Louis University, Dr. Gladys Grunwald. Anyway, quite a number of people. Had a man who represented the Missouri Association of Counties, Fred Bell, who represented the Missouri Municipal League. Mm-hmm. And all these people had some vested interest in government, with the exception of one. We had one that we appointed who was a housewife.
Okay.
A stay-at-home mother.
Okay.
And we met numbers of times and debated this issue of public employee collective bargaining, that is to allow unions to, and any public employees to organize as unions and so forth. And it was quite an experience. I saw how difficult, even then, we're talking a lot of years ago, how difficult it was to be a legislator, because it sounds easy to write a bill, introduce a bill. No.
Words matter.
There's a whole lot more to it. And I watched a lot of horse trading going on, too.
Words matter, and every issue is very complex.
Right.
Some are simple principles, but making them work out on paper is often very complex.
And when we came up with a model bill for public employee collective bargaining, we encountered some things. There were some people, obviously, who didn't want a Republican governor to get credit for something that would benefit the whole concept of unions. And then there were those who were opposed to any kind of unions. So our first meeting was, I'll tell it now because most of these people, other than myself, are dead. Our first meeting was secret. We went in one at a time, staggered into one of the offices in the Capitol building, the office of the, I think he like the director of the budget or something or other. Anyway, it was, at that time, it was right inside the Capitol and around to the right. And we met in his outer office. We came in one at a time so that we didn't attract the attention of the press, so that we had that pressure off of us until we could get things going. So I appreciate the 8 years you put in as a state rep. By the way, I want to say this, folks. Your state representative is probably the most powerful connection you have with your state capital. If you live in Missouri, I'm sure it may be the same way in other states. But if I wanted something done then years later, when Nancy and I were working with the Department of Corrections and the criminal justice system in Missouri, I went to my state rep.
Yes, sir. Yep.
My state rep could get it done. Now, thank you for those 8 years. And you must have been, I know you weren't hard up for work. So you had to have a heart for people then to, when you use up those 8 years, run for the state senate.
I really felt like I needed to do that, and I had some folks call me, which people I really respected, and I decided I had to do it. I needed to serve. I felt like it was a sacrifice that I needed to make. We made that decision as a family. We have done that with every election, and I had to explain early on to my young girls what veto meant, because they all could have blocked it. But it was important to do it. You know, the Senate is quite different from the House. It's a much smaller body with 34 members. But you were mentioning the importance of the state rep. We're very fortunate in Missouri that our legislature, it's very accessible. we have the fourth largest House of Representatives in this country. That 163, for example, in Greene County, there's 7 legislative districts, and we have 1.5 Senate districts. But it's not difficult at all, as you said, to just call up your state representative and or have a meeting and have a discussion. The Speaker of the House, by the way, lives right here in Greene County.
Yes.
And it was a little bit different in the Senate. It was smaller. It was more like a family, if you will, because it was just 34 people. So, and a lot of opportunity to learn how to work together.
Folks, I'm chuckling here because while he's talking about the Senate, I have these thoughts flashing through my mind. Our federal Senate, the Senate of the United States of America, is supposed to be the world's greatest deliberative body. We, some of us question that these days, but on the state level, our state Senate should be the best deliberative body in the state of Missouri. Mm-hmm. And I remember before I went to Jeff City, the senators got in a squabble over the egg industry, chicken eggs. And they had the egg industry, the poultry industry, had put eggs on every senator's desk. They ended up in an egg fight, throwing eggs at each other, and it cost the taxpayers a bunch of money to get the walls in the Senate redecorated because they were splattered with eggs. You may not have known that story.
I haven't heard that one. I've heard several, but I have not heard that one.
But that was a one-time flash in the pan kind of thing, folks. I'm not putting down the state Senate as it is composed now, or as it was when Bob was there, or as it was when I was working in Jeff City. It was very interesting, to say the least, to do that. Now, I want to come around now that you've got your state legislative stuff behind you, and we've touched a little bit on being a presiding commissioner, which is the chief administrative officer for Greene County, which we're looking at 280,000 people. This is no small thing. Again, your family's involved.
Yes.
I know you're married and you have children. Tell us about your family.
My wife and I will be married 28 years this next month.
And as they say in the Ozarks, and they said it wouldn't last.
There were folks that said that. We have 3 wonderful daughters. They're 24, 22, and 16.
Wow.
And they will all graduate next May. 2 from college over at Evangel University, and then our youngest will graduate from Central High School.
Wow.
So she's actually graduating a year early because she's doing summer school, but it is so gratifying to see how they've grown, and I give the credit to my wife because, you know, I was gone Monday through Thursday for
right.
16 years, half of the year, trying to parent over the phone and long distance, and then trying to make up for it on the weekends.
Right.
They're wonderful girls.
Now, does your wife work, do something? Is she in business or whatever?
She does. In fact, she is the executive assistant to one of the vice presidents over at Evangel, student development, vice president of student development. And she's been over there a little over 10 years, enjoys that very much.
Good.
So she develops students.
Right.
And that's been a great thing in, you know, our girls' latter life, because she's been able to, you know, more recently kind of help them prepare for that part of their learning experience and so forth. Recently, very recently, she just took her state real estate exam and is in the process of beginning that as a second career, and no plans to leave the university at this point, but you know, she's always been interested in that, and so we can look for maybe some developments in that area soon.
Now, what was your background other than being a state representative? I thought you may have been in the insurance industry at one time.
I served on the insurance committee, but I was never in the insurance industry. I was in the banking industry.
Oh, okay.
I started out, my first job actually was 16 years old, and I was trying to raise money to go on a political trip for the Teenage Republicans. And I did go on that. I went to Washington, and we stood with President Reagan in the Rose Garden. But I was trying to raise money, and a fellow who was in office here at the time said, "What you need, son, is a job." And so I made a couple of phone calls at his recommendation, and my first job was over on Battlefield Road at Great Southern Bank, I was outside, handing out dog biscuits and deposit tickets to people so they could keep the line moving.
Now, that in those days, that was Great Southern Savings and Loan.
That's right. It was,
How
yes.
about that?
And so I was there for almost 5 years. I supervised, before I left, I had supervised the teller line and had managed 2 of their branches, one over on West Battlefield and one up at the Northtown Mall. But those have both moved now, but did that, and then for about 6 years I was with Boatman's Bank later. And so I had done that, and then I've been involved in the payments industry for a number of years after that, and then did some mortgage loan work at the Assemblies of God Credit Union more recently before going into getting my real estate license. And actually that was my plan when I left the Senate, was to do real estate full-time and just go back into the private sector. But as history would have it, I had some folks who came around and said, "You have got to run." And my pledge was I would read the news reports and see what was going on. I knew there were some things going on in Greene County, but I only had seen the headlines. And once I read a little deeper, in good conscience, I had to at least stand and give the folks a choice. And so that's all history, and things are going well at the county. There's some awesome people there who, as employees, view themselves as public servants every day.
I don't know all of the people who have been your political opponents in these races, but I do know that you have prevailed over a woman who had a background in education and also had been a state representative at one time. I know that you prevailed over someone who was a retired firefighter and quite a union supporter and that sort of thing. A well-known vote getter in his little district at that time. And then your latest opponent was a office holder of your party, and you bested him in the primary and then went on to win the general. So you've had some real adventures in the political realm. And I want to hastily point out, folks, that Harry Truman, who was the only president from Missouri, known as the man from Missouri, who played piano. As far as we know, he could play the Missouri Waltz. That's all we ever heard him play. He'd sit down at the keyboards, play the Missouri Waltz. Harry Truman worked in a haberdashery, sold men's clothing. He became what was a county judge, which was then now would be called a county commissioner.
Right.
And anyway, became a senator and then vice president and very quickly president. And Harry Truman said that politics was a worthy profession. And he treated it that way, that if you're going to be a politician and basically a professional because you're being paid, make it a good profession. And I'd say people of both parties would have to say Harry Truman lived up to his own ideas there. You have too. You've made this a profession now for a good many years, and obviously, Nancy, what do you think? I think he's done a good job of representing people professionally.
Yeah, I think so, and he makes a good appearance. And everything that he says is just so precious. And so you just take him at his word, folks.
Now, when Nancy says he makes a good appearance, that's pretty important. We were in a bank yesterday, and the banker came out, and he says, "How do you manage to have such a good-looking woman following you around all the time?" And I said, "Well, for one thing, I'm a real winner, and she knows how to pick a winner." we conflab back and forth. Nancy's decided you're a winner, Bob.
All right.
Now,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
we want to look beyond now and look well into the future. There are no term limits for Commissioner of Greene County.
That's correct.
I'm not going to ask you questions here that would put you on the spot or anything of the kind, but you are really young. How old are you?
I just turned 50 on Memorial Day.
You don't look 50.
Oh, thank you.
I'm serious. A while ago when you were talking about the ages of your children, my oldest is 63 and a half. How about that?
All right.
My son, Paul Jr., is 63 and a half. My baby is not, my baby's older than you. Anyway, you have a lot of viable years to serve people. I'm sure in the back of your mind you think, someday maybe I would like to do this kind of thing or that kind of thing, and then, like the real estate or like the banking industry. And by the way, the president of Acts Ministry had a strong background in banking.
Oh,
Dr.
I know
Warren.
that's right.
Very strong background in banking. But, sometimes, I know even at my age, 84, when I began thinking about options for the future, they always seem to come together for me: ministry, preaching. I was called to preach. That's what I do, mainly. I have other things I could do, even at my age. But what I'm getting at, Bob, is I know you like, probably in the back of your mind, someday here's this real estate thing, especially with your wife doing that. You all could work together. And here's the banking industry. And in fact, there would be all kinds of options if you become a former office holder, one who's had success. There's a lot of open doors.
Sure.
But they still kind of come back to this thing. You are a great politician.
Well, thank you, first of all. I've read parts of a book that I've started here recently that speaks to vocation and just trying to do what you really enjoy, whatever that is. And it's very heartening just trying to find that. And I think we spend a lot of our time in life trying to find our vocation.
Right.
And for me, whether that was working at the bank, whether it was in the payments industry when I was taking care of merchants with their payment equipment, the real common denominator was serving people.
Oh, no, that's right.
And, I think really that's what ministry is.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
Whatever you're doing, that is that common denominator. And so I guess I would answer that question. I don't know, and I'm always cautious I don't want to get ahead of myself or my maker, either one.
There you go.
But
That's right.
as you were kind of going there, I was going back to something we were talking about earlier about unearthing the Jordan Creek and how people might have a dream or a vision of something. But it's sort of similar to that, I guess. Sometimes we just don't know, but sometimes just like that, sometimes things develop over time, and sometimes things become more and more clear, and then things begin to flow together.
That's right.
And so I think the important thing is for us to do well what we're doing, and that's really my focus right now with the county. We have a $70 plus million budget every year. We're getting ready to go in and do that again for 2020, and just being a good steward and making sure that we've done everything we need to do, and but at the same time being open to what we should be doing futuristically as well. So I'm open. I want to be obedient, but I also want to be a good steward of what has been given to me right now.
Well, I certainly agree with what he's saying here, and I want you to understand that he has this very strong background as a professional politician, very successful, always served in a way that his constituents could say, we are pleased with this man, with his service. And he's still young, and if he decides not to be a presiding commissioner until he's 65 years old, there may be something else. I know at one time he dipped his toe in the water, tested the water about running for governor of Missouri. And in fact, I was honored. You called me and asked me about it, told me what you were going to do,
Yes.
what you were thinking about. Being the presiding commissioner of Greene County is a pretty big deal when you're talking about 280,000 people and a $70+ million budget, and having administrative responsibilities that's not only just on the particular level that we think of the county commissioners, but actually there's a whole lot of folks working for you.
There are over 900 employees at Greene County when you count everyone, and that's not even including employees that are of boards that are shared with the city of Springfield. We have a number of boards that are shared with the city, and they all view themselves as public servants. They're great people, and they do a good job.
So as you can see, what I'm intimating is this job that he's doing is such a big job. It's a huge position. It is certainly the kind of thing that generates experience that one would want in another office somewhere. And
I can tell you it's very different from being in the legislature. It's much more just the fact that it's local versus state, but also administrative versus legislative.
Right.
It's very different. I've had to learn a lot of new things. I'm grateful, very grateful for the opportunity to serve.
Well, we're looking forward to many, many, many more years of your service here.
Thank you.
Or for the state at large, or who knows, maybe even on the national level someday. But we're privileged to have you here today. There's so many other things that I'd really like to talk with you about, but I can see by the proverbial old clock on the table that I'm down to like less than 4 minutes. How about that, Matt? Usually Matt's over there telling me, because, oh, you did? I wasn't looking. But Matt and Jason are always on hand. Matt is our station manager. Jason is the shift manager, and these guys do a terrific job. Sometime in the morning at 8 o'clock, tune in for their morning drive.
All right.
Did I get it right? Morning drive.
You can be on our show as well.
Yeah, they'd
All
be
right.
glad to have you. And,
Very good.
And they talk back and forth. They talk a lot of Bible. They talk a lot of spiritual values, talk a lot of ethical values, social values.
Goofiness.
Do what?
We're goofy.
Yeah. And it's a good show. And they're Monday through Friday. And you've been doing this how many years, guys?
4 years.
4 years.
July 7th, it was 4 years.
Do you realize that now Nancy and I've been doing this hour for a year, and Nancy became my co-host months ago. So
It has been almost a year, hasn't
it's
it?
been a year. This is the month of August. This month is about gone.
Wow, time flies.
Well, how about that? And you guys didn't have a big cake or anything for me. Now don't do
We
that.
were
next
looking out for your blood sugar, Dr. Paul.
You guys get your feet up.
You can see why we call this the happy hour, folks. We do have, this politics is such a serious subject, but look how much fun we've had with it so far. And I'm going to be watching to see if there's any unusual digging going on in downtown Springfield, like they're digging up Jordan Creek. Personally, I plan on living to be 120.
That's
so
great.
I want to see that. Have a creek flowing through downtown Springfield. What do you guys think about that?
Absolutely. Please do that.
Do it.
Again.
Yeah, again. Let it flow again.
Yeah, I was wondering where Jordan Creek was at. And I knew it was downtown, but I didn't know where.
Yeah.
There's actually a place you can. They used to take tours under there in the culvert, but most of the time it's dry. So when the either in spring or in rain season, it really fills up. But yeah.
Well, if we get the thing opened up, we have enough springs around here. We ought to be able to feed it so we have the creek flowing through downtown Springfield and have festivals just like they do in San Antonio, only better.
There we go.
Well, folks, we're down here to where I have a little bit over a minute, so I want to remind you this is the happy hour, and it's time for my famous slow close.
Real quick, be sure and tune in next for the Basics of Faith with Dr. Marty Hamilton.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Marty Hamilton does a great job. He is a phenomenal Bible student and researcher. Anyway, my famous slow close. This is Paul Collins, along with my wife, Nancy. Our special guest, Bob Dixon, presiding commissioner of Greene County. This is the happy hour you've been watching. It's the friendliest show on radio. It's the best look on Facebook. And it will melt every ice cube that watches YouTube. And the slow close is about to run out. Fellas, I still have a few seconds left. What do I do? How do I stretch for a few seconds? Well, I can stretch by simply saying, remember, in September, the first Friday in September, Marty Hamilton, Dr. Hamilton will be on at 9, and Nancy and I will be here at 9:30. That starts first Friday in September. So we're all done. Join us again next week right here for the happy hour. Thanks for watching.